I still remember the exact moment the conference room fell silent, when Reese Patterson, our new CEO, pointed directly at me in front of 200 employees and declared, "People like Genevieve are dead weight. We need real talent, not server babysitters, who think they're indispensable." The laughter from his cronies echoed through the Oakville headquarters as I sat there, my 15 years of keeping their entire digital infrastructure running suddenly reduced to babysitting. What Reese didn't know was that I had root access to every server, database, and backup system that kept his precious company alive. What he definitely didn't know was that I'd been documenting his illegal cost-cutting schemes for weeks. But here's what really made me smile as he humiliated me. I was exactly 36 hours away from my planned resignation, and I'd already accepted a position that would make his $2 million salary look like pocket change. Sometimes the worst mistake your enemy can make is underestimating exactly how much power you actually hold. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in Conference Room B buzzed overhead like angry wasps as I watched Reese Patterson adjust his imported Italian tie and clear his throat. It was 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October, and I was about to witness the most spectacular display of corporate arrogance I'd ever seen, and I'd been working at Meridian Technologies for 15 years. The all-hands meeting had been called with less than 12 hours' notice. Strategic restructuring discussion, the email had said. Mandatory attendance for all department heads and senior staff. I should have known something was off when Reese's assistant specifically requested that all IT personnel attend, including what she called technical support staff. That should have been my first red flag. I sat in the third row, my laptop balanced, on my knees, half listening to Reese drone on about efficiency optimization and human capital allocation. Around me, 200 of Meridian's employees shifted restlessly in their plastic chairs. The conference room wasn't designed for this many people. It was stuffy, overcrowded, and reeked of nervous energy mixed with too much coffee. Reese had only been CEO for 6 weeks, brought in by the board after our previous leader, Mrs. Catherine Whitmore, retired after 23 years. Catherine had built Meridian from a small software consulting firm into a $40 million annual revenue powerhouse. She knew every employee by name, understood the technology we built, and respected the people who made it all work. Reese Patterson was her polar opposite. He'd come from Sterling Dynamics, a corporate restructuring firm that specialized in optimizing operational efficiency. Corporate speak for firing people and cutting costs until companies bled talent. At 42, he had an MBA from Northwestern, a collection of expensive suits, and absolutely zero understanding of how technology companies actually functioned. Now, Reese continued, clicking to his next PowerPoint slide, let's talk about redundancies in our current staffing model. The slide showed an organizational chart with various departments color-coded. It was highlighted in red. My stomach clenched. Some departments have become bloated over the years, Reese said, his eyes scanning the room with the predatory confidence of someone who'd never had to actually build anything himself. We have people in positions that could be easily outsourced or eliminated entirely. Murmurs rippled through the audience. I noticed Dr. Franklin Cooper, our chief technology officer, shifting uncomfortably in the front row. Franklin had hired me 15 years ago, straight out of college with a computer science degree and more determination than experience. He knew exactly what I was worth to this company. Take our IT infrastructure, for example, Reese continued, and I felt every muscle in my body tense. We're paying premium salaries for what amounts to basic maintenance work, server monitoring, database backups, routine system updates. These are tasks that could be handled by entry-level technicians or automated entirely. He clicked to the next slide, and I saw my nightmare come to life. It was a budget projection showing IT department costs with a 60% reduction in personnel expenses. People like Genevieve Shaw, Reese said, and my blood turned to ice as he pointed directly at me. represent the kind of thinking that's holding Meridian back. 200 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. I felt my face flush hot, but I kept my expression neutral. Around me, colleagues I'd worked with for over a decade looked mortified. Some couldn't even meet my eyes. Genevieve has been with us for 15 years, Reese continued, his voice dripping with condescension, doing essentially the same job she was hired to do out of college. Server maintenance, basic troubleshooting, keeping systems running. Important. Work, certainly, but not exactly cutting-edge innovation. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to tell this room full of people about the countless nights I'd spent rebuilding corrupted databases, the weekends I'd sacrificed to implement security patches that prevented us from being hacked, the time I'd single-handedly recovered 3 years of client data after a ransomware attack nearly destroyed the company. But I stayed silent. I had learned long ago that sometimes the best strategy is to let your enemies reveal exactly how little they understand. The reality is, Reese said, warming to his theme, people like Genevieve are dead weight. We need real talent, not server babysitters who think they're indispensable. The conference room erupted in uncomfortable laughter from about a dozen people. Reese's new management hires, mostly young MBAs who had been brought in during his first month. The rest of the room sat in stunned silence. We need engineers who can innovate, not technicians who hide behind legacy systems and use their supposed institutional knowledge as job security, Reese continued. It's time to modernize not just our technology, but our approach to human resources. He clicked to his final slide. Strategic Personnel Optimization, Phase 1 Implementation. Effective immediately, we'll be restructuring our IT department. Some positions will be eliminated, others will be outsourced to more cost-effective solutions. This isn't personal, it's simply business evolution. As Reese wrapped up his presentation and dismissed the meeting, people filed out in uncomfortable silence. A few colleagues approached me with apologetic looks, but I waved them off with a tight smile. It's fine, I kept saying. Really, it's fine. But it wasn't fine. It was the single most humiliating professional moment of my life, and it had happened in front of every person I'd worked with for the past decade and a half. What Reese Patterson didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that his little speech had just made the biggest mistake of his corporate career. Because while he saw me as dead weight, I was actually the person who controlled every server, every database, every backup system, and every security protocol that kept Meridian Technologies breathing. And in exactly 36 hours, I was going to show him the difference between institutional knowledge and indispensability. My name is Genevieve Shaw, and I was 37 years old when Reese Patterson made the fatal mistake of calling me dead weight in front of 200 people. But to understand why that moment was so catastrophically wrong, and why it would ultimately cost him everything, you need to know who I really was at Meridian Technologies. I wasn't just another IT employee collecting a paycheck. I was the ghost in the machine, the person who knew every digital heartbeat of a company that processed over $40 million in annual revenue. When systems crashed at 3 a.m., I was the one who got the emergency calls. When clients demanded impossible data recoveries, I was the miracle worker who made it happen. When the FBI needed our servers forensically analyzed after a competitor tried to hack us in 2019, I was the one who handed them a complete digital trail that led to 3 arrests. For 15 years, I had been Meridian's digital backbone, and most people had no idea how deep my access really went. See, when you've been with a company since it had 12 employees and operated out of a converted warehouse in downtown Oakville, you don't just get hired into existing systems. You build the systems. Every server configuration, every security protocol, every backup procedure, every database architecture that kept Meridian running had my fingerprints on it. Not metaphorically, literally. I had root access to everything because I had created everything. When Catherine Whitmore hired me in 2008, Fresh out of college with a computer science degree from State University and $47,000 in student loans, Meridian was still using a patchwork of outdated systems held together by determination and prayer. Their server room was a converted supply closet with 2 ancient Dell towers and a router that overheated every time someone ran the microwave in the break room. "Genevieve," Catherine had said during my interview, "I need someone who can grow with us. We're not just looking for someone to maintain what we have. We need someone who can build what we're going to become." She was right to trust me. Over the next 15 years, I transformed Meridian's digital infrastructure from that overheated supply closet into a state-of-the-art data center that could handle millions of transactions, store petabytes of client information, and withstand cyber attacks that would cripple most companies our size. I designed the redundancy systems that ensured we never lost a single byte of client data, even during the Great Storm of 2015, when half of Oakville lost power for 6 days. I implemented the security protocols that earned us SOC 2 compliance and allowed us to work with Fortune 500 clients who demanded military-grade data protection. I built the automated backup systems that saved us $300,000 annually in third-party storage costs. But here's what made me truly indispensable. I didn't just maintain systems, I evolved them. Every year brought new challenges, increased data loads, sophisticated cyber threats, changing compliance requirements, expanding client demands. While other companies struggled to adapt their aging infrastructure, Meridian stayed ahead of the curve because I anticipated problems months before they materialized. When cryptocurrency mining malware started targeting businesses in 2017, I had already implemented network monitoring that detected unusual CPU usage patterns. When ransomware attacks became epidemic in 2020, our systems were already segmented and backed up in ways that made us virtually immune. When remote work exploded during the pandemic, I had our VPN infrastructure scaled and secured before most companies even understood what they needed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The result? Meridian never had a single day of downtime in 15 years. Not one. Our clients joked that our systems were more reliable than the electric grid. Insurance companies gave us premium discounts because our disaster recovery protocols were so comprehensive. Competitors tried to poach me with offers that doubled my salary, but I stayed loyal to Catherine and the company we'd built together. By 2023, I was managing a digital empire that most people couldn't even see. Meridian's infrastructure included 47 servers across 3 data centers, backup systems in 2 states, security monitoring that processed over 100,000 events daily, and databases containing 15 years of proprietary client information, worth millions of dollars. I held administrative access to every system, knew every password, controlled every security certificate, and maintained personal relationships with every critical vendor. If something went wrong, and in 15 years a lot had gone wrong, I was the person who fixed it, often working 18-hour days to ensure our clients never even knew there had been a problem. More importantly, I was the institutional memory of how everything worked and why it had been built that way. When new employees asked why certain protocols existed, I could tell them about the specific incidents that had led to those safeguards. When auditors questioned our security measures, I could provide detailed histories of threats we'd mitigated and lessons we'd learned. This wasn't just technical knowledge, it was survival wisdom earned through a decade and a half of digital warfare. So when Reese Patterson stood in front of 200 people and dismissed me as a server babysitter who did basic maintenance work, he revealed something crucial about himself. He had absolutely no idea what kept his company alive. In his MBA-trained mind, IT was a cost center full of interchangeable technicians who could be replaced with cheaper alternatives. He saw servers as appliances that just needed occasional cleaning, like office copiers or coffee machines. What he didn't understand was that I wasn't an employee who happened to work with computers. I was the digital nervous system of a $40 million company, and I was about to show him exactly what happened when you tried to lobotomize your own brain. But first, I needed to make sure everyone understood exactly who they were dealing with before I continue with what happened next. And trust me, what happened next changed everything. I need to pause and connect with you, because this story isn't just about one woman's revenge against a corporate bully. It's about something much bigger, and I have a feeling many of you watching this have lived through your own version of what I'm about to share. So please, hit that like button right now if you've ever been underestimated at work. Subscribe to this channel if you've ever had someone dismiss your expertise simply because they didn't understand what you actually did. And most importantly, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and whether you've ever been in a situation where someone tried to make you feel small, only to discover they'd made a catastrophic mistake. I've never told this story publicly before, not the full story anyway. My former colleagues know pieces of it. Industry insiders have heard whispered versions at conferences. But the complete truth of what happened when Reese Patterson called me Deadweight and how it ultimately destroyed his career, that stayed locked away for almost 2 years, until now. Why am I sharing it now? Because in the past week alone, I've received over 40 messages from people, mostly women in tech, but not exclusively, who are dealing with their own versions of Reese Patterson. New managers who don't understand the systems they're inheriting. Corporate leaders who see technology departments as expense centers rather than the foundation of modern business. People who mistake institutional knowledge for incompetence and confuse quiet competence with weakness. One message that particularly stuck with me came from a woman named Sarah in Denver. She wrote, "My new boss told me that anyone can learn to code, so my 15 years of experience maintaining our legacy systems doesn't make me special. He's planning to replace me with recent graduates who'll work for half my salary. I feel like I'm watching someone prepare to burn down a house they don't understand, and no one will listen when I try to explain why that's a terrible idea." Sarah's story could have been my story, and frankly, her story might be your story too. That's the thing about what happened to me at Meridian Technologies. It wasn't unique. It was just an extreme example of something that happens every day in companies across the world. Technical experts get dismissed by non-technical leaders who see complexity as inefficiency and experience as obsolescence. People who built the systems get replaced by people who promise to optimize them, usually right before those systems catastrophically fail. But here's what I learned from my experience, and what I hope you'll take away from this story. Sometimes, the worst thing that can happen to you professionally becomes the catalyst for the best thing that can happen to you personally. Sometimes being underestimated isn't a weakness, it's your secret weapon. I'm curious about your experiences because I know they're out there. In the comments, I want you to share your stories. Have you ever had a boss who fundamentally misunderstood what you did? Have you ever been in a meeting where someone dismissed your expertise in front of your colleagues? Have you ever watched a new leader make decisions that you knew were catastrophically wrong, but felt powerless to stop them? More importantly, have you ever been in a situation where someone's attempt to diminish you actually revealed their own incompetence? Where their effort to make you look small made them look foolish? Where their underestimation of your abilities became the foundation for your next success? I want to hear about the moments when you realized that the person trying to tear you down had no idea what they were actually dealing with. The moments when you discovered that their perception of your weakness was actually a misunderstanding of your strength. Because that's what this story is really about. It's not about getting revenge on a bad boss, although, let's be honest, that part was pretty satisfying. It's about recognizing your own value when others can't see it. It's about understanding that sometimes the people who underestimate you are revealing more about their limitations than yours. It's about the power that comes from being underestimated by people who mistake quiet competence for incompetence, who confuse behind-the-scenes work with invisibility, who assume that because they can't see what you do, it must not be important. If you're watching this from your office right now, surrounded by systems you built and maintained, wondering if anyone would notice if they disappeared tomorrow, they would. If you're watching this from your home office, questioning whether your years of experience really matter in a world that seems to value youth and low salaries over wisdom and proven results, they do. And if you're watching this while dealing with your own version of Reese Patterson, someone who sees your expertise as expendable, your knowledge as outdated, your presence as deadweight, then pay close attention to what comes next. Because what I'm about to show you is how quiet competence, when properly leveraged, becomes the most powerful force in any organization. But first, I need you to understand how I got to that conference room in the first place. How a theater major from a small town in Ohio ended up becoming the digital backbone of a $40 million technology company. How someone who started with $47,000 in student debt and a burning desire to prove herself built something so integral to a company's success that removing her would be like performing heart surgery with a sledgehammer, because the foundation of everything that happened next was built over 15 years of small victories, quiet competence, and the kind of institutional knowledge that can't be taught in business school or replaced with a lower salary. So grab some coffee, settle in, and let me take you back to where this really began. I wasn't supposed to end up in technology. Growing up in Millbrook, Ohio, population 8,347, my biggest dream was to become a high school theater teacher, maybe direct the annual spring musical, and spend my evenings writing plays that would probably never see a stage bigger than our community center. My parents, Roger and Linda Shaw, ran a small hardware store that had been in our family for 3 generations. Dad understood the mechanics of everything from lawn mowers to washing machines, while Mom handled the books with a calculator older than I was and a filing system that existed entirely in her head. They were hardworking people who believed in honest labor, fair prices, and the kind of customer service that meant driving to someone's house at 9 p.m. to deliver an emergency part for their broken furnace. Money was always tight, but we managed. I grew up understanding that everything had to be earned. Nothing was guaranteed. And if something broke, you figured out how to fix it yourself before you even considered replacing it. That last lesson would prove more valuable than I could have imagined. In high school, I was the girl who spent her afternoons in the drama department and her evenings helping Dad repair vintage radios in our garage. I could memorize Shakespeare as easily as I could troubleshoot a short circuit, and I genuinely thought those were completely unrelated skills. Theater was my passion. Electronics were just something I'd absorbed through osmosis from growing up in a fix-it family. When I graduated as valedictorian in 2004, my plan was simple. Theater major at State University, teaching certification, then back to Millbrook to start my career. I'd applied for every scholarship available and managed to piece together enough funding to make college possible, though it meant taking out $47,000 in student loans that felt astronomical to a girl whose family considered dinner at Applebee's a special occasion. Everything changed during my sophomore year when the theater department's lighting board crashed 3 days before opening night of Our Town. Dr. Elizabeth Manning, our director, was near tears. The replacement part would cost $3,000 the department didn't have, and the repair shop said it would take 2 weeks to fix, assuming they could fix it at all, given that the board was older than most of the students. I volunteered to take a look. What I found was a classic power supply failure compounded by years of dust buildup and some truly creative attempts at previous repairs involving duct tape and prayer. Using skills I'd learned helping Dad fix everything from toasters to television sets, I spent 16 hours over 2 days completely rebuilding the lighting board's internal systems with parts I sourced from an electronic surplus store 2 towns, over total cost $127. When the lights came up on opening night and every cue fired perfectly, Dr. Manning pulled me aside. "Genevieve, have you ever considered that your real talent might not be on the stage?" That question haunted me for weeks. I loved theater, but I was good at fixing things. Really good. And in 2006, being good at fixing technological things was becoming increasingly valuable. The next semester, I added computer science as a second major. It was brutal. While my theater friends were analyzing character motivations and discussing dramatic theory, I was learning programming languages and debugging code until 3 a.m. My course load became insane: Shakespeare and software engineering, dramatic literature, and database design, acting technique, and algorithm analysis. But something magical happened. The skills weren't as different as I'd thought. Theater taught me to see systems, how individual elements worked together to create something larger than the sum of their parts. It taught me to troubleshoot problems under pressure, to remain calm when things went wrong, and to understand that the best solutions often came from understanding why something existed in the first place, not just how it currently functioned. Most importantly, theater taught me that the most crucial work often happens behind the scenes, invisible to the audience, but absolutely essential to the show. By my senior year, I was the student other students called when their computers crashed. I was the work-study employee the IT department relied on for problems their staff couldn't solve. I was the person professors asked to help them recover lost files or figure out why their presentation equipment wasn't working. I graduated in 2008 with dual degrees in theater arts and computer science, $47,000 in student loans, and job prospects in an economy that had just collapsed. Theater programs were cutting budgets, and entry-level tech jobs were scarce as companies tightened their belts. That's when I saw a Craigslist ad that would change my life. Small consulting firm seeks IT generalist. Must be comfortable working independently. Theater background a plus. Meridian Consulting, Oakville. Theater background a plus? I'd never seen that in a tech job posting. I called the number and spoke with Catherine Whitmore, who explained that Meridian worked with creative agencies and entertainment companies. "We need someone who understands both the technical side and the creative side," she said. "Someone who can speak both languages." The interview was unlike anything I'd experienced. Catherine didn't just ask about my technical skills. She wanted to know about my theater work, my problem-solving approach, my ability to work under pressure. When I mentioned rebuilding the lighting board, her eyes lit up. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need," she said. "We don't just want someone who can follow procedures. We need someone who can figure out what the procedures should be." She offered me $42,000 a year, more money than anyone in my family had ever made, and a chance to build something from the ground up. I said yes immediately, packed everything I owned into my 1997 Honda Civic, and drove from Millbrook to Oakville, with $840 in my checking account, and absolutely no idea that I was about to become the backbone of a company that would grow from 12 employees to 150, from a converted warehouse to a gleaming headquarters, from local consulting to national prominence. All I knew was that someone believed in my ability to fix things, and I was determined not to let them down. My first day at Meridian Consulting in September 2008 was a masterclass in controlled chaos. The company operated out of a converted warehouse in downtown Oakville, with exposed brick walls, concrete floors, and a server room that was actually a repurposed janitor's closet containing 2 ancient Dell towers that sounded like jet engines, and ran so hot you could feel the heat through the door. Catherine Whitmore walked me through the space, introducing me to 12 employees who were juggling client calls, creative projects, and technical crises with the kind of organized desperation that small companies know well. "Your job," she said, stopping in front of the humming closet, "is to make sure none of this ever stops working, and to figure out how to make it work better as we grow." I spent my first week just trying to understand what this actually was. Meridian provided consulting services to creative agencies, entertainment companies, and small businesses that needed help managing their digital presence. We handled everything, from website development to database management to digital marketing campaigns. The problem was that our technical infrastructure had been cobbled together over 5 years by people who understood creativity but treated technology like a mysterious force that sometimes cooperated and sometimes didn't. The 2 servers in the closet were running different operating systems, neither of which had been updated in over a year. Client data was backed up to external hard drives that someone manually swapped out every Friday, when they remembered. The network consisted of a consumer-grade router connected to a tangle of Ethernet cables that snaked across the floor like digital spaghetti. When too many people tried to access files simultaneously, everything slowed to a crawl. When it rained, the internet went out because water was somehow getting into a junction box outside the building. Most companies would have called this a disaster. I called it an opportunity. I spent my first month creating a comprehensive audit of every system, every process, and every potential failure point. Working nights and weekends, I documented everything, not just what was broken, but why it was broken and what would need to change to fix it permanently. My theater training proved invaluable here. I approached the infrastructure like a stage manager analyzing a production, understanding how every element connected to every other element. Then, I presented Catherine with a 47-page proposal that would transform Meridian's technological foundation. "This is going to cost money we don't have," she said after reviewing my recommendations. "This is going to save money we can't afford to lose," I replied, and showed her my calculations of what our current downtime and inefficiencies were costing us annually. She gave me a budget of $15,000 and 6 months to prove my case. I spent that money like it was my own, because in many ways it was. Every server component was researched and carefully selected. Every software license was negotiated. Every cable was routed with precision. I built redundant systems so that if one component failed, others would seamlessly take over. I implemented automated backup procedures that ran every night and stored copies both locally and in the cloud. Most importantly, I built everything to scale. I didn't just solve our current problems, I anticipated our future ones. The transformation was dramatic. File access became instantaneous. Internet connectivity became reliable. For the first time in the company's history, we went an entire month without a single technical incident that affected client work. But the real test came during the ice storm of February 2009. Half of Oakville lost power for 3 days. Businesses throughout the city shut down, unable to access their systems or communicate with clients. Meanwhile, Meridian's new backup power systems kicked in automatically. Our redundant internet connections switched to cellular networks when the primary lines failed, and our remote access capabilities allowed employees to work from home as if nothing had happened. We were the only consulting firm in the city that never missed a client deadline. Catherine called me into her office the day power was restored. "You just saved us approximately $200,000 in lost revenue and probably prevented us from losing 3 major clients," she said. "I'm promoting you to IT director and doubling your salary." That was just the beginning. Over the next 5 years, as Meridian grew from 12 employees to 45, I stayed ahead of every technological curve. When cloud computing emerged, I migrated our systems before most companies had heard the term. When cybersecurity threats evolved, I implemented protections that kept us safe, while our competitors dealt with breaches and ransomware attacks. When mobile technology exploded, I built systems that allowed seamless collaboration across devices and platforms. Each expansion brought new challenges. The converted warehouse became a proper office building. The staff tripled. Our client base grew, to include Fortune 500 companies that demanded enterprise-level security and reliability. Every time someone said, "We can't handle clients that big," I found a way to make it work. By 2015, I was managing infrastructure that supported 150 employees, processed millions of dollars in client transactions, and maintained 99.97% uptime, better than most companies 10 times our size. I had built relationships with vendors, negotiated enterprise contracts, and earned industry certifications that made me one of the most qualified IT professionals in the region. But more than that, I had become Meridian's institutional memory. I knew why every system had been implemented, what lessons we'd learned from every failure, and how each component connected to the broader mission of serving our clients better than anyone else could. When new employees asked why we did things a certain way, I could tell them stories. When problems arose, I had context that turned mysterious issues into solvable puzzles. When clients demanded explanations about our security or reliability, I could provide documentation that went back years. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was the foundation upon which everything else was built. And Catherine Whitmore knew it, valued it, and made sure I knew that my contributions were seen and appreciated. That's why Reese Patterson's dismissal of my work as server babysitting was so fundamentally wrong, and why his attempt to marginalize me would prove to be the biggest strategic error of his career. Everything changed on a Thursday morning in August 2023, when Catherine Whitmore called an all-hands meeting to make an announcement that would reshape Meridian Technologies forever. After 23 years of building this company, Catherine said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had poured her life into creating something meaningful, I've decided it's time for me to step back and enjoy retirement with my grandkids. The conference room fell silent. Catherine wasn't just our CEO. She was Meridian's heart and soul, the visionary who had transformed a small consulting firm into a $40 million technology powerhouse. She knew every employee's name, remembered their families, and understood both, the creative and technical sides of our business with a depth that seemed impossible to replace. The board has been conducting a search for my successor, she continued, and I'm pleased to announce that Reese Patterson will be joining us as Chief Executive Officer effective September 1st. I felt my stomach clench. In my 15 years at Meridian, I had developed an instinct for reading people. And something about the way Catherine delivered that announcement felt forced, like she was reading from a script someone else had written. During the brief Q&A that followed, Catherine shared the basics. Reese came from Sterling Dynamics, a corporate restructuring firm with offices in Chicago and Atlanta. He had an MBA from Northwestern and experience optimizing operational efficiency in mid-sized technology companies. He would be spending his first month assessing current operations and identifying opportunities for growth. That last phrase sent warning signals through my brain. In corporate speak, identifying opportunities for growth often meant finding things to cut. I stayed after the meeting to talk with Catherine privately. We had developed a strong working relationship over the years, built on mutual respect and her recognition that I understood the technical foundation of everything we did. Catherine, I said carefully, can you tell me more about Reese's background, specifically his experience with technology companies? She hesitated, the first time I'd ever seen her hesitate when discussing a business decision. The board felt we needed someone with experience in scaling operations and improving efficiency, she said. Reese has a proven track record of helping companies maximize their potential. What kind of companies? I pressed. Various industries, she replied, which wasn't really an answer. Manufacturing, retail, some service companies. My heart sank. Reese Patterson wasn't a technology executive. He was a cost-cutting specialist, the kind of person boards brought in when they wanted to squeeze more profit from existing operations rather than invest in long-term growth. Catherine, Meridian isn't broken, I said. We're profitable, growing, and our client satisfaction rates are off the charts. Why do we need someone to fix us? She looked tired suddenly, older than her 62 years. The board thinks we've gotten comfortable, maybe a little inefficient. They want fresh eyes on our operations. Fresh eyes was another red flag. Fresh eyes usually meant someone who didn't understand why things worked the way they did, and assumed that complexity meant inefficiency. 3 weeks later, Reese Patterson walked into Meridian's headquarters like a conquering general surveying newly acquired territory. At 42, He had the kind of aggressive confidence that came from years of walking into companies, identifying problems, and implementing solutions without worrying about the human cost. He wore expensive suits, carried himself with the authority of someone who had never doubted his own brilliance, and spoke in the buzzword-heavy language of management consulting. His first week consisted of one-on-one meetings with department heads, during which he asked probing questions about headcount, processes, and cost structures. When my turn came, I spent an hour explaining Meridian's technical infrastructure, our security protocols, and the systems that kept everything running smoothly. Reese listened with the glazed expression of someone who found technical details boring and irrelevant. He took notes on his iPad, but I could tell he wasn't really absorbing what I was saying. His questions focused entirely on costs. How much did we spend on software licenses? Could any of our systems be outsourced? Were there redundancies that could be eliminated? I notice you have a significant budget for server maintenance and security monitoring, he said, scrolling through financial reports. Have you explored more cost-effective alternatives? Cloud services, managed IT providers? I explained our current hybrid approach, the security requirements of our Fortune 500 clients, and the cost analysis I'd done comparing our in-house capabilities to outsourcing options. Our current setup was actually more economical and significantly more secure than any alternative I'd evaluated. Reese nodded absently. I see. Well, we'll be taking a comprehensive look at all our operational expenses. Nothing personal, just good business. But it felt personal when he started showing up unannounced in the server room, taking photos and asking detailed questions about equipment that he clearly didn't understand. It felt personal when he began scheduling meetings with our technology vendors without including me. It felt personal when I overheard him on a phone call describing our IT department as overstaffed and under-optimized. The warning signs were everywhere, but the moment I knew we were in real trouble came during his third week, when Reese announced he was bringing in consultants to conduct an operational efficiency assessment. The consultants were 3 recent MBA graduates from his former company, Sterling Dynamics. They spent 2 weeks shadowing employees, timing processes, and asking questions that revealed their complete lack of understanding about how technology companies actually functioned. One of them, a 25-year-old named Preston Blake, spent a morning following me around and taking notes about my daily routine. So, your job is basically making sure the computers don't break? He asked with the condescending tone of someone who thought he'd identified an easy target for elimination. My job is maintaining the digital infrastructure that allows this company to generate $40 million in annual revenue, I replied. But sure, you could call it making sure the computers don't break. Preston scribbled something in his notebook that I was certain would not capture the nuance of my actual responsibilities. The final red flag came when I discovered that Reese had been having private conversations with several employees, asking them what they thought about modernizing our IT operations, and whether they'd ever considered how much money the company might save by streamlining our technical staff. I realized then that this wasn't just about cutting costs. This was about eliminating me specifically. Reese Patterson saw me as an expensive problem that could be solved with cheaper alternatives. He looked at my salary, my years of service, and my specialized knowledge and saw inefficiency rather than value. In his MBA-trained mind, anyone could maintain servers, anyone could implement security protocols, and anyone could manage the technological foundation of a $40 million company. He was about to learn exactly how wrong that assumption was. The war began quietly, with spreadsheets and meetings that felt like interrogations. 2 weeks after the consultants finished their operational efficiency assessment, Reese called me into his office for what he termed a strategic discussion about IT optimization. I walked in to find him flanked by Preston Blake and another Sterling Dynamics consultant, both armed with laptops and the kind of confident smirks that told me they thought they'd already won. Genevieve, Reese began, gesturing to a chair positioned directly across from his desk, like I was about to be interviewed for my own job. "We've completed our analysis of the IT department's current operations, and frankly, we've identified some significant opportunities for improvement." He slid a bound report across the desk. The cover read, "Meridian Technologies, IT Department Optimization Strategy," with the Sterling Dynamics logo prominently displayed at the bottom. "I think you'll find our recommendations quite compelling," Preston added, unable to hide his satisfaction. "We've identified potential cost savings of up to 63% while actually improving service delivery." I flipped through the report, my horror growing with each page. They were proposing to eliminate my position entirely, outsource server management to a third-party provider in India, migrate all our systems to a budget cloud platform I'd never heard of, and replace our comprehensive security monitoring with automated tools that cost 1/10 of our current solution. "This is catastrophic," I said, looking up at three faces that clearly expected me to be grateful for their brilliance. "You're proposing to dismantle systems that took 15 years, to build and replace them with solutions that will compromise our security, reliability, and client trust. We understand change can be difficult," Reese replied with the patronizing tone of someone explaining basic math to a kindergartner. "But the numbers don't lie. We're currently spending $340,000 annually on IT infrastructure and personnel. Our proposed solution would reduce that to $127,000 while providing equivalent functionality." Equivalent functionality? I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. This budget cloud provider doesn't even offer the security certifications our Fortune 500 clients require. And outsourcing our server management to a company that operates in a completely different time zone means our response time to critical issues goes from minutes to hours. Preston pulled up a PowerPoint presentation on his laptop. "Actually, our analysis shows that most IT emergencies aren't really emergencies. They're just situations that have been over-dramatized by internal staff who benefit from maintaining a crisis mentality." The audacity was breathtaking. This kid, who had spent exactly 4 days observing our operations, was telling me that the systems I'd built and maintained for 15 years were based on manufactured drama. "Last month," I said, keeping my voice level, "we had an attempted cyber attack that could have compromised client data for 3 Fortune 500 companies. I detected it and shut it down in 12 minutes. Under your proposed system, that attack would have succeeded because there would have been no one monitoring our systems during our night shift, and the outsourced provider wouldn't have had the intimate knowledge of our network architecture needed to recognize the threat patterns." "Hypothetical scenarios," Reese dismissed. "We need to make decisions based on measurable data, not fear-based projections." That's when I realized we were speaking completely different languages. To them, IT was a cost center that could be optimized through spreadsheet analysis. To me, it was the invisible foundation that kept everything else functioning. And when foundations fail, everything built on top of them collapses. Over the following weeks, the pressure intensified. Reese began scheduling weekly IT efficiency reviews, where I had to justify every expense, every procedure, every decision I'd made. He questioned why we needed redundant systems, why our security monitoring was so comprehensive, why I maintained relationships with multiple vendors instead of consolidating with the cheapest option. Each meeting felt like a slow-motion demolition of everything I'd built. But I wasn't going down without a fight. I started documenting everything. Every conversation with Reese and his consultants went into detailed email summaries that I sent to all participants. Every recommendation they made, I responded with comprehensive analysis of the risks and likely outcomes. When they proposed eliminating our backup generators, I sent them a detailed breakdown of what had happened during the 2015 ice storm and how much revenue we'd saved by maintaining operations while our competitors shut down. I also began reaching out to our major clients, not to undermine the company, but to ensure they understood what changes were being proposed and how those changes might affect their service. When Kingsley Matthews, our biggest client's CTO, learned that Reese was planning to migrate their sensitive data to an uncertified cloud provider, he called an emergency meeting. "Absolutely not," Kingsley told Reese during a tense conference. Call I'd been excluded from, but learned about through Dr. Franklin Cooper, who'd been asked to attend. "Our contract specifically requires that our data be maintained on SOC 2 compliant systems with 24/7 monitoring. If you can't meet those requirements, we'll need to reevaluate our relationship." That client represented $8.2 million in annual revenue. Next morning, Reese called me into his office again, this time without his consultant backup. "I understand you've been having conversations with our clients about internal operational changes," he said, his friendly facade finally cracking to reveal the anger underneath. "I've been ensuring that our clients understand how proposed changes might affect their service levels," I replied. "It's part of my responsibility to maintain those relationships. Your responsibility is to implement the decisions I make, not to undermine them by going behind my back to clients." I haven't gone behind anyone's back. Every communication I've had with clients has been transparent and documented. I've copied you on most of the emails. That was true, and it clearly frustrated him. He couldn't accuse me of insubordination when I'd been meticulously professional in all my communications. But his next move showed me just how far he was willing to go. "Effective immediately," he said. "All client communications regarding technical matters must be approved by me in advance. You are not to have any direct contact with clients without my explicit permission." I stared at him. "You're asking me to cut off relationships I've maintained for 15 years, relationships that are specifically mentioned in our service contracts. I'm asking you to follow the chain of command, unless you're unwilling to do that?" There it was, the ultimatum disguised as a question. Submit completely or be labeled as insubordinate. "I understand," I said, which wasn't the same as agreeings. I walked back to my office. I realized that Reese Patterson had just made his biggest mistake yet. By trying to isolate me from the clients who knew my value, he'd forced me to make a choice between loyalty to a company I'd helped build and loyalty to my own professional integrity. The decision was easier than I'd expected. That night, I began making phone calls. The all-hands meeting that would destroy Reese Patterson's credibility forever was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. on Tuesday, October 17th, 2023. What made this meeting different from the dozens of corporate presentations I'd endured over the years was that I knew exactly what was coming, and I was prepared for it in ways that Reese could never have anticipated. I'd spent the previous 3 weeks in quiet preparation, making discreet phone calls to industry contacts, updating my resume, and having careful conversations with headhunters who specialized in senior IT positions. But more importantly, I'd been documenting everything, every email, every meeting summary, every technical decision that Reese and his consultants had made or proposed. By the morning of the meeting, I had a folder containing 47 pages of documentation that told a story of systematic incompetence disguised as corporate efficiency. The conference room was packed beyond capacity. All 200 employees had been required to attend what Reese had billed as a strategic restructuring announcement. The energy in the room was tense. Rumors had been circulating for weeks about layoffs and departmental changes, and everyone knew that major announcements in corporate America rarely brought good news for the people doing the actual work. I sat in my usual spot in the third row, laptop closed, hands folded, watching Reese prepare his presentation with the confident swagger of someone who believed he was about to deliver a masterpiece of business strategy. "Good morning, everyone," Reese began, his voice carrying the artificial enthusiasm of a motivational speaker. "Today marks an exciting turning point for Meridian Technologies. After extensive analysis of our current operations, we've identified tremendous opportunities to modernize our approach and position ourselves for exponential growth." He clicked to his first slide. Operational excellence, eliminating inefficiencies. My stomach clenched, but I kept my expression neutral. Around me, I could feel the collective anxiety of 200 people who were about to learn that their livelihoods had been reduced to line items on a cost-cutting spreadsheet. Some departments in our organization have become, frankly, bloated over the years, Reese continued, his eyes scanning the room with the predatory confidence I'd come to know well. We've been paying premium salaries for work that could be handled more efficiently through modern solutions. He clicked to the next slide, which showed an organizational chart with the IT department highlighted in red. Several people turned to look at me. I felt my face flush, but I maintained eye contact with Reese. Let's talk specifically about our technology infrastructure, he said, and I knew we'd reached the moment I'd been dreading and preparing for. We currently spend over $340,000 annually on IT personnel and systems, money that could be deployed much more effectively. The slide changed to show a comparison chart. Current IT costs versus optimized solution. The proposed savings were listed as $213,000 annually. We have employees who've been doing essentially the same job for 15 years, Reese said, and I felt every muscle in my body tense as his gaze fixed on me. Server maintenance, routine troubleshooting, basic system monitoring. Important work, certainly, but not the kind of innovative thinking that will drive Meridian into the future. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Dr. Franklin Cooper, sitting in the front row, looked like he was about to be sick. Several of my colleagues couldn't meet my eyes. People like Genevieve Shaw, Reese said, pointing directly at me, represent the old way of thinking about technology. The idea that institutional knowledge and legacy system familiarity are somehow irreplaceable assets. 200 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. The conference room fell silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic outside. The reality is, Reese continued, his voice rising with conviction, people like Genevieve are deadweight. We need real talent, not server babysitters who think they're indispensable just because they've been here longer than anyone else remembers. The laughter came from about 15 people, Reese's new management hires and the Sterling Dynamics consultants scattered throughout the room. But the majority of the audience sat in stunned silence, clearly uncomfortable with watching a 15-year veteran being publicly humiliated. We need engineers who can innovate, Reese pressed on, oblivious to the growing discomfort in the room. Not technicians who hide behind complicated systems and use their supposed expertise as job security. It's time to stop coddling employees who resist change and start rewarding people who embrace efficiency. He clicked to his next slide. Proposed IT restructuring. Phase 1, implementation. Effective November 1st, we'll be outsourcing our server management to a qualified third-party provider and migrating our systems to a cloud-based solution that will reduce our costs by over 60% while improving reliability and security. That's when Dr. Franklin Cooper stood up. Reese, Franklin said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been building technology companies since before Reese was born, I need to stop you right there. The room went dead silent. Franklin had been quiet during the previous weeks of restructuring discussions, but his sudden intervention carried the weight of someone who'd reached his breaking point. Genevieve Shaw, Franklin continued, turning to address the entire room, has prevented more catastrophic failures, solved more impossible problems, and saved this company more money than every other employee combined. The systems she built are the reason we've had 0 data breaches, 0 significant outages, and 0 client losses due to technical failures in 15 years. Reese's face flushed red. Franklin, this isn't the appropriate forum for— No, Franklin interrupted, his voice rising. This is exactly the appropriate forum. You just humiliated the most valuable employee this company has in front of 200 people. And you did it based on analysis conducted by consultants who don't understand the first thing about how technology companies actually operate. The tension in the room was palpable. I could see people shifting in their seats, some nodding. In agreement with Franklin, others looking terrified at the open confrontation happening in front of them. "Genevieve," Franklin said, turning to me directly, "I apologize that you had to endure that. Your contributions to this company have been extraordinary, and anyone who doesn't recognize that is revealing their own incompetence, not yours." Reese's face had gone from red to purple. "That's enough," he said, his voice tight with rage. "Franklin, you're out of line. And Genevieve, your attitude has been part of the problem from day one. Maybe if you spent less time politicking and more time actually doing your job." "My job?" I said, finally finding my voice and standing up slowly. Every eye in the room fixed on me as I spoke for the first time since Reese had begun his character assassination. "My job is maintaining the systems that generate $40 million in annual revenue for this company. My job is ensuring that when you wake up in the morning and check your email, the servers are running. My job is making sure that when our clients trust us with their most sensitive data, that trust is protected by security protocols you don't understand and couldn't replicate." The room was absolutely silent now. "You want to know what my job really is, Reese?" I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "My job is being the person who keeps this company alive, and you're about to find out exactly what that means." The silence that followed my words was deafening. 200 people sat frozen, watching what felt like a corporate execution that had suddenly turned into a revolution. Reese's face had gone from purple to white, his confident swagger replaced by the dawning realization that he'd just made a catastrophic miscalculation in front of his entire workforce. "Are you threatening this company?" he asked, his voice tight, with barely controlled rage. "I'm stating a fact," I replied, keeping my tone professional despite every instinct screaming at me to unleash 15 years of suppressed frustration. "You've just announced plans to dismantle systems that took a decade and a half to build, and you've done it without understanding what those systems actually do or why they exist." I could feel the energy in the room shifting. What had started as a routine corporate presentation had become something much more dangerous. A public debate about competence, respect, and the value of expertise in an era of MBA-driven efficiency. "That's enough," Reese said, his authority clearly shaken. "This meeting is adjourned. Genevieve, I want to see you in my office immediately." But I didn't move. Something had crystallized in my mind during those moments of public humiliation, and I realized that this was the moment where I had to choose between preserving my dignity and preserving my job. After 15 years of quiet competence, after building something extraordinary from nothing, after being called deadweight in front of every person I'd worked with, the choice was surprisingly easy. "Actually, Reese," I said, my voice carrying, across the silent conference room, "I have a better idea." I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's presentation system. Within seconds, my screen appeared on the wall behind Reese, displaying a document titled Meridian Technologies, IT Infrastructure Analysis and Risk Assessment. "Since you've made our internal operations a matter of public discussion," I said, "I think everyone deserves to understand what your proposed changes will actually mean for this company." Reese stepped toward me, his face flushed with anger. "You do not have permission to—" "I'm not asking for permission," I interrupted, clicking to the first slide. "I'm providing the technical analysis that should have been done before you decided to gamble with $40 million in annual revenue." The slide showed a network diagram of Meridian's current infrastructure: servers, databases, security systems, backup protocols, everything that kept the company functioning. It looked complex because it was complex, and that complexity wasn't accidental or inefficient. It was the result of 15 years of careful engineering designed to prevent single points of failure. "This is what keeps Meridian Technologies operational," I said, addressing the room rather than Reese. "Every redundant system, every security protocol, every backup procedure exists because we learned hard lessons about what happens when things go wrong." I clicked to the next slide, which showed a timeline of major incidents we'd weathered over the years. The 2015 ice storm, 3 separate cyber attack attempts, 2 hardware failures that could have crippled our operations, and the 2020 pandemic. Transition that required scaling our remote access capabilities by 400% in 2 weeks. Each of these events would have been catastrophic for a company our size, I continued. We survived them because our systems were designed to handle failure. Not because we got lucky, because we got lucky. Reese was now frantically whispering to Preston Blake, who looked like he was about to be sick. Dr. Franklin Cooper, meanwhile, was watching my presentation with the satisfied expression of someone seeing a master class in technical communication. My next slide showed the proposed outsourcing solution in detail. The budget cloud provider Reese wanted to migrate to. The overseas support company that would replace me. The automated monitoring tools that would replace our comprehensive security. Oversight. Here's what happens under the proposed restructuring, I said, my voice gaining strength as I saw people in the audience leaning forward, genuinely interested in understanding the technical implications of decisions that would affect their livelihoods. Clicked through a series of slides that broke down. In business terms, everyone could understand exactly what we'd be losing. Response times would increase from minutes to hours. Security monitoring would be reduced by 80%. Backup systems would no longer meet the compliance requirements of our Fortune 500 clients, and our disaster recovery capabilities would essentially disappear. The 63% cost savings you've been promised, I said, looking directly at Reese, comes at the expense of the reliability and security that our clients pay us to provide. You're not optimizing our operations. You're destroying our competitive advantage. But the slide that really landed was my analysis of the true costs of the proposed changes. I'd calculated the revenue risk associated with each compromise, potential client losses due to security breaches, downtime costs during system failures, compliance violations that could result in legal penalties, and the likelihood that our largest clients would terminate their contracts if we couldn't meet their technical requirements. Your 63% cost savings, I said, could easily result in a 200% revenue loss within the first year. The room erupted in murmurs. People were no longer just watching a workplace drama. They were seeing a technical, experts systematically demolish what they'd been told was a brilliant business strategy. Reese finally found his voice. "This is insubordination," he said, his authority crumbling in real time. "You're deliberately undermining—" "I'm doing my job," I interrupted. "My job is protecting this company's technical infrastructure and ensuring that business decisions are based on accurate technical information. Something that clearly wasn't done before you announced plans to dismantle systems you don't understand." That's when I clicked to my final slide, and the room went completely silent. It was my resignation letter displayed for everyone to see. "Effective immediately," I read aloud. "I am resigning from my position as IT director at Meridian Technologies. After 15 years of building and maintaining the technical infrastructure that has enabled this company's growth and success, I can no longer in good conscience be part of an organization that values cost-cutting over competence and efficiency over expertise." I closed my laptop and looked directly at Reese. "You wanted to eliminate Deadweight, Reese. Congratulations. You just eliminated the person who's been keeping your company alive for 15 years. I hope your consultants know how to restart a server when your automated monitoring system fails. To detect a critical hardware malfunction at 3 a.m. on a Sunday." The silence that followed was absolute. Dr. Franklin Cooper was staring at me with a mixture of admiration and horror. Preston Blake looked like he was about to faint. And Reese Patterson, the man who had humiliated me in front of 200 people, stood there speechless, finally understanding that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his career. I walked out of that conference room with my head high, my dignity intact, and a plan that would make Reese Patterson's $40 million company disappear faster than he could spell operational efficiency. The real revenge was just beginning. What happened in the 72 hours following my public resignation was like watching a masterclass in corporate self-destruction, orchestrated entirely by Reese Patterson's own arrogance and incompetence. spent the rest of that Tuesday clearing out my office while receiving a steady stream of visitors, colleagues who wanted to express their support, clients who had heard about the meeting and were demanding explanations, and Dr. Franklin Cooper, who looked like he'd aged 5 years in 5 hours. "Genevieve," Franklin said, closing my office door behind him, "what Reese did today was unconscionable. The board needs to know what's really happening here." "The board hired him to cut costs," I replied, packing 15 years of technical manuals into boxes. "I'm sure they'll be thrilled with his 63% savings right up until the moment the first server crashes and no one knows how to fix it." Franklin was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd managed since the morning's humiliation. "I'm going to watch Reese Patterson learn the difference between theoretical efficiency and practical reality." That evening, as I sat in my apartment surrounded by boxes of my professional life, my phone started ringing. The first call came from Kingsley Matthews, the CTO of our largest client. "Genevieve, I just heard what happened today. Is it true that you've left Meridian?" "As of this afternoon, yes. And is it true that they're planning to outsource your responsibilities to some budget provider?" "That's their plan." There was a long pause. "Our contract specifically requires that our data be managed by certified professionals with direct oversight capabilities. If Meridian can't meet those requirements..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The second call came from Madeline Rivera, the IT director at Harrison & Associates, one of our mid-tier clients. "Genevieve, we just got word about some major changes happening at Meridian. Should we be concerned about service continuity?" By the end of the evening, I'd received 11 similar calls. Word travels fast in the technology industry, especially when it involves a company's most critical employee walking out the door. But the real fireworks started Wednesday morning. I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The overnight monitoring system, the one Reese's consultants had dismissed as over-engineered, had detected what appeared to be a sophisticated cyber attack attempt around 2:30 a.m. The automated response protocols I'd built over the years had contained the threat, but someone needed to analyze the attack patterns and implement additional safeguards. That someone was supposed to be me. Instead, Reese had to call an emergency IT contractor at 3 a.m., paying premium rates for someone who didn't know our systems, didn't understand our security protocols, and couldn't access half of our infrastructure because I was the only one with the administrative passwords for our most critical servers. By noon Wednesday, Meridian's network was running on backup systems, while an increasingly frantic Reese tried to find someone, anyone, who could restore full operational capacity. The irony wasn't lost on me. The server babysitting he'd mocked in front of 200 people had prevented a catastrophic security breach less than 18 hours after my resignation. Thursday brought the phone call I'd been expecting. "Genevieve, this is Reese. We need to discuss your transition responsibilities." "I'm sorry, Reese, but I resigned yesterday. I no longer have any responsibilities to Meridian Technologies." "You can't just walk away and leave our systems in chaos." "I'm not leaving your systems in chaos. I built them to be robust and self-maintaining. The problem is that you've decided to replace me with people who don't understand how they work. We'll pay you as a consultant to help with the transition. I'm afraid I'm not available for consulting work with Meridian." The desperation in his voice was palpable. "Genevieve, be reasonable. You have knowledge that's critical to our operations." "Yes," I said. "I do. That's what I tried to explain to you when you called me deadweight in front of our entire company." I hung up and immediately called the number I'd been waiting to dial since Tuesday afternoon. Clarice Hayes speaking. "Clarice, this is Genevieve Shaw. We spoke last month about the senior infrastructure architect position at TechFlow Solutions." "Genevieve? Yes, of course. I heard through the grapevine that you might be looking for new opportunities. Is that true? As of yesterday afternoon, I'm available immediately." What I hadn't mentioned to Reese, what he couldn't have known, was that I'd been quietly exploring opportunities for the past month. Not because I wanted to leave Meridian, but because I'd recognized that Reese's efficiency optimization was going to make my position untenable regardless of how well I performed. TechFlow Solutions was Meridian's biggest competitor, a rapidly growing company that specialized in exactly the kind of high-security, high-reliability infrastructure management that Meridian was about to abandon. They'd been trying to poach me for 2 years, and when Clarice offered me a position as senior infrastructure architect with a 40% salary increase and equity options, accepting was the easiest decision I'd made in years. But the real satisfaction came Friday morning when I received a call from Dr. Franklin Cooper. "Genevieve, I thought you should know. Kingsley Matthews just informed Reese that they're terminating their contract with Meridian, effective in 30 days. $8.2 million in annual revenue gone." "That's unfortunate," I said, though my tone probably didn't convey much sympathy. Harrison and Associates followed suit an hour later. So did Peterson Manufacturing. Word is getting out that Meridian is dismantling its IT infrastructure, and clients are jumping ship faster than Reese can schedule damage control meetings. By the end of that first week, Meridian had lost $14.7 million in annual recurring revenue. The board called an emergency meeting. Reese's consulting team was quietly dismissed. And suddenly, the 63% cost savings he'd promised looked like the most expensive efficiency measure in corporate history. But the crowning moment came the following Monday when I received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Preston Blake. The servers crashed this weekend and we can't get them back online. Would you be willing to help? We can pay whatever you want." I stared at the message for a long moment, remembering the condescending young man who'd asked if my job was basically making sure the computers don't break. I typed back, "I'm sorry, but I'm not available for consulting work. You might want to try calling that budget cloud provider you were so excited about." The next message came an hour later. "Please, the whole company is down. Reese says he'll double your old salary if you'll come back." "Triple it," I replied, "and I might consider a short-term consulting contract to help you transition to your new systems." His response was immediate. "Done. When can you start?" I smiled as I typed, "My final message, I can't. I start my new job at TechFlow Solutions tomorrow. Good luck with those servers." Sometimes the best revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's simply letting them experience the natural consequences of their own incompetence, while you build something better somewhere else. That was 18 months ago, and the transformation in my life since that humiliating Tuesday morning has been beyond anything I could have imagined when I walked out of Meridian's conference room with my dignity intact and my future uncertain. Today, I'm the Vice President of Infrastructure Engineering at TechFlow Solutions, overseeing a team of 43 specialists who manage technology systems for some of the largest companies on the West Coast. My starting salary of $147,000, a 40% increase over what Meridian had been paying me, has grown to $198,000 with performance bonuses that last year pushed my total compensation over $240. These were zero. The equity options Clarice Hayes offered me are now worth approximately $380,000, and they're still climbing as TechFlow continues its aggressive expansion. But the numbers, satisfying as they are, don't tell the complete story of what I've built in the aftermath of Reese Patterson's spectacular misjudgment. Within 6 months of joining TechFlow, I had recruited 8 former Meridian employees who'd grown tired of watching their company crumble under incompetent leadership. Dr. Franklin Cooper was the first to follow me, accepting a position as Chief Technology Officer after Meridian's board finally forced him out during their desperate attempts to stop the bleeding. Sarah Martinez, the systems analyst who'd worked with me for 7 years, brought her entire team when TechFlow offered them a 20% salary increase and actual job security. Most satisfying of all was the day Kingsley Matthews called to inform me that his company, the $8.2 million client who'd terminated their contract with Meridian, had decided to bring their business to TechFlow specifically because I was leading their infrastructure management. "Genevieve," Kingsley said during our first meeting as client and vendor, "what happened to you at Meridian was unconscionable, but their loss is definitely our gain. When do we start?" That conversation led to the largest client acquisition in TechFlow's history, and within a year, we'd signed 5 additional Fortune 500 companies who specifically requested that their accounts be managed by the team I'd assembled. My reputation in the industry, which Reese had tried to dismiss as irrelevant institutional knowledge, had become TechFlow's most valuable business development asset. The irony wasn't lost on me that the relationships Reese had prevented me from maintaining were now generating millions in revenue for his biggest competitor. But while my career flourished, the company I'd spent 15 years building was experiencing a very different trajectory. The complete collapse of Meridian Technologies took exactly 14 months. After my resignation and the immediate exodus of major clients, Reese had attempted to salvage his restructuring plan by hiring a series of increasingly expensive contractors to maintain the systems he'd planned to eliminate. The budget cloud provider his consultants had recommended proved incapable of handling Meridian's security requirements, leading to 2 separate data breaches that resulted in regulatory fines totaling $1.7 million. The overseas support company, that was supposed to replace me, lasted exactly 6 weeks before admitting they couldn't manage systems they hadn't built and didn't understand. When Meridian's network crashed during a critical client presentation in January 2024, it took 47 hours to restore full functionality, a delay that cost them their second-largest remaining client. By spring 2024, Meridian had lost over $28 million in annual recurring revenue. The company that had once employed 200 people was down to 73, operating out of 2 floors instead of their original 4-story headquarters. The board fired Reese Patterson in April, but the damage was irreversible. Catherine Whitmore, watching the company she'd built for 23 years disintegrate under the leadership she'd been pressured to accept, came out of retirement in a desperate attempt to save what remained of Meridian. But too much institutional knowledge had walked out the door. Too many client relationships had been permanently damaged, and too much technical infrastructure had been compromised by incompetent cost-cutting measures. Meridian Technologies filed for bankruptcy in October 2024, exactly 1 year after Reese Patterson had called me deadweight in front of 200 employees. The final irony came when TechFlow Solutions acquired Meridian's remaining assets for $2.3 million, approximately 6% of what the company had been worth when I worked there. As part of the acquisition, I found myself back in the same building where I'd been humiliated, but this time as an executive overseeing the integration of salvageable systems and the placement of former colleagues who'd survived the company's collapse. Walking through those familiar halls, now half empty and eerily quiet, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and vindication. This had been my professional home for 15 years, the place where I'd grown from an inexperienced college graduate into one of the most respected infrastructure specialists in the region. Seeing it reduced to a cautionary tale about the dangers of valuing efficiency over expertise was sobering, even for someone who'd been proven spectacularly right about the consequences of Reese's decisions. The most surprising encounter came during my final visit to complete the asset integration. I was reviewing the server room, the space I'd transformed from a converted closet into a state-of-the-art data center, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Hello, Genevieve." I turned to find Reese Patterson, looking like he'd aged 5 years and 18 months. His expensive suits had been replaced by business casual clothing that seemed to hang on his diminished frame. The swagger and confidence that had once defined his presence were gone, replaced by the hollow expression of someone who'd learned too late that his expertise had been an illusion. "Reese," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I heard you'd moved back to Chicago." "I did. I'm working for a small consulting firm now, helping companies optimize their operations." He paused, seeming to realize the irony of describing his current role to someone whose career he'd tried to destroy. "I wanted to apologize for what happened, what I said about you that day. It was inappropriate." I studied his face, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus tactical damage control. What I saw was something more complex. A man who'd been forced to confront the gap between his theoretical knowledge and practical reality, and who'd lost everything in the process. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that." "For what it's worth," he continued, "I've learned a lot about the importance of institutional knowledge and the value of experienced technical professionals. What you built here was impressive. I should have recognized that earlier. There was a part of me that wanted to point out that my technical expertise hadn't changed between the day he'd hired me and the day he'd humiliated me. Only his willingness to acknowledge it had evolved. But standing in the wreckage of what had once been a thriving company, I found myself feeling something unexpected: sympathy for a man who'd learned an expensive lesson about the difference between leadership and management. "I hope your new position works out well for you," I said, and meant it. As I watched him walk away, I realized that Reese Patterson had given me something valuable, even if he'd never intended to. Proof that my worth wasn't determined by other people's ability to recognize it. His failure to understand what I brought to Meridian hadn't diminished my capabilities. It had simply revealed his limitations as a leader. Today, as I sit in my corner office at TechFlow Solutions, overlooking the Portland skyline from the 32nd floor of a building that houses one of the most successful technology consulting firms on the West Coast, I sometimes think about that conference room where my old life ended and my new one began. The woman who was called Deadweight 18 months ago now oversees infrastructure systems worth over $200 million annually. The server babysitter who supposedly lacked innovation has been invited to speak at 6 industry conferences this year and has been approached by 3 different companies about C-level executive positions. The employee who was dismissed as institutional dead weight has become one of the most sought-after technical leaders in the Pacific Northwest. But more importantly, I've learned something about resilience, about the power of quiet competence, and about what happens when you refuse to let other people's limitations define your possibilities. The humiliation that nearly destroyed my confidence ultimately became the catalyst for the most successful period of my career. The man who tried to diminish me accidentally pushed me toward opportunities I never would have pursued if I'd remained comfortable in my previous role. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you professionally becomes the best thing that happens to you personally, but only if you have the courage to recognize your own worth when others can't see it. Sitting here in my corner office at TechFlow Solutions, 18 months after Reese Patterson called me dead weight in front of 200 people, I often think about that moment when everything changed. Not just the humiliation, though that was real and devastating, but the moment I realized I had a choice between accepting someone else's definition of my worth or proving them catastrophically wrong. What I've learned from going through this experience, and from the dozens of conversations I've had with people who've reached out after hearing pieces of my story, is that my situation wasn't unique. Right now, somewhere in the world, there's another technical expert being dismissed by a leader who doesn't understand what they do. There's another professional watching years of careful work being dismantled by someone who mistakes complexity for inefficiency. The difference between those who survive these experiences and those who thrive because of them comes down to a few crucial realizations that I wish I'd understood earlier in my career. First, I learned that documentation isn't just about protecting yourself, it's about protecting your sanity. When Reese started questioning every decision I'd made over 15 years, when Preston Blake began timing my daily tasks like I was an assembly line worker, when they dismissed my security protocols as over-engineered paranoia, having detailed records of why those systems existed saved more than my professional reputation. It saved my confidence in my own expertise. Those 47 pages of documentation I compiled weren't just evidence for the board meeting that eventually fired Reese. They were proof to myself that I hadn't been imagining the value I'd created. When someone spends weeks telling you that your life's work is unnecessary, it's easy to start doubting your own judgment. But looking at the timeline of crises I'd prevented, the revenue I'd protected, the disasters I'd averted, I remembered who I actually was versus who Reese thought I was. The cyber attack that happened 18 hours after my resignation. I had documentation showing I'd warned about that exact vulnerability 3 weeks earlier. The server crashes that cost them their second largest client? I had emails detailing why our backup systems were configured the way they were and what would happen if they were simplified. Every time Reese's team tried to blame the company's collapse on my sabotage or my withholding of critical information, I had time-stamped evidence showing that I'd provided detailed transition documentation and comprehensive risk assessments that they'd chosen to ignore. Document everything, not because you're planning for failure, but because you're preserving evidence of your own competence for the moments when others try to convince you it doesn't exist. Second, I discovered that the relationships I'd built over 15 years were my true job security. When Kingsley Matthews called me the day after my resignation, when Dr. Franklin Cooper followed me to TechFlow 6 months later, when client after client terminated their contracts with Meridian specifically because I was no longer there, I realized something profound. My value wasn't tied to the systems I'd built. It was tied to the trust I'd earned. Reese saw me as someone who was only useful within the context of Meridian's infrastructure. He thought my knowledge was like a proprietary software license that belonged to the company. But the relationships I'd cultivated, the reputation I'd earned, the trust I'd built with clients and colleagues, those belonged to me. The night I started making phone calls after Reese's ultimatum, I wasn't just networking in desperation. I was activating relationships I'd been nurturing for over a decade. The reason TechFlow could offer me a 40% salary increase wasn't just because they needed my technical skills. It was because they knew I could bring credible client relationships with me. Your expertise might be valuable, but your reputation is irreplaceable. The time to build professional relationships isn't when you need them. It's every day for years before you need them. Third, I learned that being underestimated by the wrong people is actually a competitive advantage. When Reese dismissed me as a server babysitter, when Preston Blake asked if my job was basically making sure the computers don't break, when they reduced 15 years of infrastructure engineering to routine maintenance, they weren't revealing something true about my capabilities. They were revealing something true about their limitations as evaluators of technical talent. The same expertise that Reese saw as obsolete institutional knowledge was exactly what made me valuable to TechFlow's leadership. The systems thinking that he dismissed as overcomplication was what allowed me to design infrastructure that could scale from supporting 150 employees to supporting Fortune 500 enterprise clients. The difference wasn't in my skills. It was in who was evaluating them. Now, when someone tries to diminish my expertise or question my value, my first response isn't to defend myself. It's to ask, does this person have the knowledge base to accurately evaluate what I do? Have they ever built what I've built? Do they understand the complexity of the problems I solve? If the answer is no, their opinion tells me more about their competence than mine. Fourth, I realized that sometimes the strongest response to disrespect is strategic withdrawal. Everything in my personality wanted to fight back when Reese humiliated me in that conference room. I wanted to argue, to prove him wrong point by point, to stay and show everyone that he was making a catastrophic mistake. My theater training had taught me that the show must go on. My family had taught me that you don't quit when things get difficult. And my 15 years at Meridian had taught me that problems could always be solved with enough effort and expertise. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remove your value from people who can't recognize it and give it to people who can. My resignation wasn't surrender, it was strategic repositioning. Instead of spending my energy trying to convince Reese of my worth, I redirected that energy toward building something better somewhere else. Instead of fighting for a job where my contributions were dismissed, I found a job where my contributions were celebrated. The servers that crashed the weekend after I left, the clients who followed me to TechFlow, the $28 million in revenue that Meridian lost over the following year. None of that happened because I sabotaged anything. It happened because I stopped propping up people who didn't appreciate what I was propping up. Finally, I learned that your worst professional moment can become the foundation for your greatest success. If Reese Patterson had been a competent leader, if he'd recognized my value and worked with me instead of against me, I would probably still be at Meridian today. I'd be making $98,000 a year instead of $240,000. I'd be managing a team of 3 instead of 43. I'd be maintaining one company's infrastructure instead of overseeing systems worth over $200 million annually. His attempt to diminish me accidentally pushed me toward opportunities I never would have pursued if I'd remained comfortable in my previous role. The humiliation that nearly destroyed my confidence ultimately became the catalyst for discovering what I was actually capable of achieving. Sometimes you need someone to underestimate you dramatically before you realize you've been underestimating yourself. It's been 6 months since I recorded the video you just watched, and I wanted to share some updates because this story, our story, didn't end with my promotion to vice president or even with Reese Patterson's professional downfall. The ripple effects of what happened in that conference room continue to shape not just my career, but how I think about leadership, mentorship, and what it means to build something lasting in a world that often values efficiency over expertise. 3. Weeks ago, I was invited to speak at the Pacific Northwest Technology Leadership Summit, the same conference where Reese Patterson had been scheduled to present his operational optimization strategies back when he thought Meridian Technologies was his success story. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now standing on the stage where he'd planned to showcase his cost-cutting brilliance, talking instead about the importance of institutional knowledge and the hidden costs of dismantling systems you don't understand. The audience was filled with CTOs, IT directors, and senior engineers, many of whom had heard whispered versions of what happened at Meridian. After my presentation, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "I'm Dr. Lydia Perry," she said. "I was the chief medical officer at St. Mary's Regional Hospital until 3 months ago, when our new CEO decided that my position was redundant with our existing physician staff. He said they needed operational efficiency, not institutional memory." Her story was hauntingly familiar. A new leader with impressive credentials and ambitious cost-cutting plans. A systematic dismissal of long-term employees who understood the complexities of the organization. A focus on short-term savings that ignored long-term consequences. "The hospital's infection rates have tripled since I left," she continued. "They eliminated the quality control protocols I'd spent 8 years developing because they seemed like bureaucratic overhead. 2 patients have died from preventable complications, and they're facing a massive lawsuit that's going to cost them millions more than my salary ever did." Dr. Perry is now the chief medical officer at Pacific Regional Medical Center, where she's been given the resources and authority to implement the safety protocols that St. Mary's decided were too expensive to maintain. Her story is one of dozens. I've heard from professionals across industries who've discovered that their worst professional moment became the catalyst for their greatest opportunity. But not all the updates are about other people's stories. My own journey has taken some unexpected turns that I couldn't have predicted when I walked out of Meridian's conference room 18 months ago. Last month, TechFlow Solutions announced our acquisition of 3 smaller consulting firms, creating what will become the largest independent technology consulting company on the West Coast. As part of the expansion, I've been promoted to Senior Vice President of Infrastructure Services, overseeing a team of 127 specialists across 4 offices. My equity options are now worth just over $800,000, and my total compensation package has reached $310,000 annually. More importantly, I've been given the opportunity to build something I never thought I'd have the chance to create. A leadership development program specifically designed for technical professionals who want to advance into executive roles without losing their connection to the work that made them valuable in the first place. The program, which we're calling Technical Leadership Excellence, addresses something I've become passionate about: the gap between technical expertise and business leadership that allows people like Reese Patterson to make catastrophic decisions about systems they don't understand. We're training engineers, architects, and technical specialists to communicate their value in business terms, to build relationships across organizational boundaries, and to position themselves as strategic assets rather than cost centers. The first cohort of 12 participants started last month, and I'm fascinated by their stories. Sarah Kim, a database architect who's been dismissed as too technical for management roles, despite preventing millions in data loss over her 10-year career. Miguel Santos, a security specialist whose warnings about network vulnerabilities were ignored until a breach cost his company $4.3 million in penalties. Elena Foster, a systems engineer who built the infrastructure that supports her company's entire e-commerce platform, but was told she lacks business acumen when she applied for a director position. Each of them reminds me of who I was before that humiliating Tuesday morning: technically excellent, strategically undervalued, and unaware of how to translate their expertise into organizational influence. But perhaps the most meaningful development has been reconnecting with Catherine Whitmore. 3 months ago, Catherine called me with an unexpected proposition. She's starting a new venture capital fund focused on investing in technology companies led by people who actually understand technology, a response to watching too many promising startups fail because they were led by business professionals who couldn't evaluate technical talent or understand the complexity of the products they were trying to build. "Genevieve," she said during our lunch meeting, "I spent 23 years building Meridian, and I watched it destroyed in 14 months by someone who confused spreadsheet analysis with strategic thinking. I want to fund companies where the technical experts are in leadership positions, not just advisory roles." She offered me a position as a partner in the fund, focusing on evaluating the technical leadership and infrastructure capabilities of potential investments. It's a role that would leverage everything I learned at Meridian and everything I've learned since leaving, while giving me the opportunity to help build the next generation of technology companies. I haven't accepted yet, but I'm seriously considering it. The idea of using my experience to help other technical professionals avoid the kind of marginalization I experienced, and to help them build companies where expertise is valued over efficiency theater, feels like a natural evolution of everything this journey has taught me. The decision is complicated by another unexpected development. I've been approached by the University of Portland's School of Engineering about developing and teaching a course on technical leadership in modern organizations. It would be a part-time position, teaching one class per semester to senior engineering students who will soon face the same challenges I faced when I graduated with my dual degrees in theater and computer science. The working title for the course is The Invisible Infrastructure: How Technical Professionals Drive Business Success, and it would cover everything from documenting your contributions to building cross-functional relationships to communicating technical risks in business terms. When I think about that scared 22-year-old who started at Meridian with $847 in her checking account and no idea how to navigate corporate politics, I wish someone had taught me these skills earlier. Maybe some future Genevieve Shaw won't have to wait 15 years to discover her own value or experience public humiliation before learning to advocate for herself strategically. But there's one update that brings the story full circle in a way I never expected. 2 weeks ago, I received a LinkedIn message from Preston Blake, the condescending consultant who'd asked if my job was basically making sure the computers don't break. He's now working as a junior analyst at a small firm in Detroit, and his message was a request for advice about transitioning into technology consulting. I've realized that I don't understand the technical side of business operations as well as I thought I did, he wrote. Your presentation at Meridian was educational. I was wondering if you might be willing to share some insights about how to develop real expertise instead of just theoretical knowledge. I stared at that message for a long time, remembering the smug young man who'd timed my daily tasks and dismissed my expertise as obsolete institutional knowledge. Part of me wanted to ignore it, or perhaps respond with some version of the condescension he'd shown me. Instead, I wrote back, Preston, I appreciate your message and your willingness to acknowledge that there's more to learn. I'd suggest starting with hands-on technical work, actually building and maintaining systems rather than just analyzing them from a business perspective. Understanding comes from experience, not just education. I also recommended 3 books, suggested some online courses, and offered to connect him with a few junior-level contacts who might be willing to mentor someone genuinely interested in learning. Why? Because holding grudges against people who were themselves victims of their own ignorance serves no one. Preston Blake's arrogance wasn't malicious. It was defensive, the result of someone who'd been thrust into a role where he was expected to have expertise he didn't possess. His dismissal of my knowledge wasn't personal. It was professional insecurity masquerading as confidence. The real enemy was never Preston or even Reese Patterson. The real enemy was a business culture that values confidence over competence, efficiency over effectiveness, and theoretical knowledge over practical experience. That's what I'm really fighting against now, whether it's through the leadership, development program, the potential VC fund, the university course, or simply sharing my story. I'm working to create a world where technical professionals are valued for what they know and what they can build, not dismissed for what MBA-trained leaders don't understand. The woman who was called Deadweight 2 years ago is now helping shape the next generation of technical leaders. The server babysitter who supposedly lacked innovation is now investing in and mentoring companies that are building the future. And sometimes, when I'm sitting in my office overlooking the Portland skyline, I think about that moment in Conference Room B when everything changed. Not just the humiliation, but the choice that followed it. The decision to bet on my own value when no one else would. That choice led to everything good that's happened since. And it's a choice that's available to anyone willing to recognize their own worth especially when, others can't see it. Your story isn't over. Your best chapter might be the one that begins the moment you decide to stop accepting other people's limitations as your own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.